Joining us here today is Scott Snyder, comic book author, Batman royalty, and the owner of Best Jackett Press, who is doing a eight-issue limited comic book series with ComiXology that is premiering exclusively on the format. And these will be published in physical format thanks to Dark Horse in 2022. Am I correct?
Yep, that's right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us here today. It is an honor to have you. I know that on some of these projects, you're also working with other comic book royalty like Raphael Albuquerque, Greg Capullo, Jock, Francesco Francavilla. So we're just incredibly honored to have you here to talk about these projects. First of all, so like eight titles, that is a lot. What is the timeline on that? Are you resting? Are you hydrating? Like, what does that look
Yes, I
like for
know.
you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Danny. I really appreciate it. I'm thrilled to have the chance to kind of finally do more creator-owned stuff after 10 years at DC. I mean, I'm so lucky that I got to work on these dream characters like Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman and Justice League, and to do, events with all kinds of, peripheral DC superheroes and villains. But the whole time I was really hoping I'd get a chance to eventually take a moment to make things with friends. And so, like you said, a lot of the people on these books are creators who I got to know over the years as real partners and inspiring human beings. And some of them are people I haven't had a chance to work with before as well, but whose work has been a big inspiration at different times in the last decade, like Jamal Igle and Tulolo Tay and so on. So, and Dan Panosian. So it's a real mix of creators who who are like old favorites of mine to work with and always push me, and then people I know will elevate my stuff and make it better than I could by myself, and add to it tremendously. So yeah, and it's 8 books over 2 years. So some of them, like We Have Demons, I already finished, and I just right before we got on here today, I started the last issue of Ghoul, which is, a big 6-issue series, but the first and last are pretty oversized, so it's more like an 8-issue series. But so they're staggered. The whole series, the whole line is staggered, where I'm never really working on more than 3 at a time. So the first 3, We Have Demons, A Clear, and Night of the Ghoul, with Greg Capullo, Francis Manipal, and Francesco Francavilla, respectively, are all out now. And then in the spring of 2022, when those come out in paperback from, or some of them in different formats like single issue, but when they come out in print from Dark Horse, the second wave of books, which will be Canary with Dan Panosian, Dudley Dotson and the Forever Machine with Jamal Igle, and Barnstormers with Tulolo Tay, those will come out digitally. And then again, 6 months later, they'll come out in print when the last 2 books, Book of Evil and Duck and Cover, come out digitally. So it's kind of like a rolling process.
That sounds great. So that does lead me to my next question, which is, you've worked with some of these artists before, and some of them you haven't. You've spoken a lot in interviews about this event that you are really working on things that push you creatively and artistically. How does that work with? Is it helpful to have people that you're familiar working with in that aspect? Like, how is this pushing you creatively, and how does it help to have people that you've worked with in the past versus like working with somebody new?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it helps a lot. I mean, on 2 fronts. Like, one, the kind of principle of working together with Greg and Raphael and people I've worked with many times, like Jock, here was to do things that we haven't done before. So for Greg and I, it was about pushing the limits of some of the things we love doing on Metal and Batman, but going farther than that, and really kind of making it more bombastic, more heartfelt, more kind of a little bit R-rated than we had a chance to do at DC. For Jock and I, it was about trying something we'd never tried, where I'm writing part prose and he's doing spot illustrations, and it's this interesting blend of text and fiction and art. And for Raphael, it was, instead of doing this long kind of more soapy, which, historical, horror series like American Vampire, it was, let's do something that takes place in the future instead of the past. So each thing, or an apocalyptic alternative reality, actually, it takes place in 1955, but it's like starts there and then goes forward into an alternative history that's really wild and post-apocalyptic. So the point is, like, with each creator I've worked with before, to do something that we haven't done, to push ourselves. And what I love about these partners is that they always want to try new things too. None of us want to kind of do the thing we've done before, play it safe to make money or any of that stuff. So the goal with the whole line is kind of, in the name, where it's named after my sons, Jack and Emmett. So Jackett is this kind of portmanteau of them. And then we had Quinn, the third one, after I'd already made the company, but I'll figure out how to get a Q in there at some point. But the idea was to do something where it would always be kind of a call to be your best creative self. And a lot of that for me at this point in my career, where I feel like I've been lucky enough to have a pretty established track record, is to risk that track record by trying things that you haven't seen before from me, speculative science fiction and historical fiction, and to just be the most exciting writer to myself that I can be, and pick partners that are going to want to, follow the same ethos with their work and try things they haven't done before too. So the line has been a joy. I mean, as much as I've had a lot of, highlights in my career, I've really never been happier or prouder of anything than this whole kind of configuration of books that I get to work on now, day in and day out.
I love that, the idea of writing things that challenge you as a reader and a writer. That's amazing. Um,
Thanks.
so you mentioned, talking about the story that works in the 1950s, and that is Duck and Cover, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I've read a little bit about it's sort of manga inspired as well. Is that something that
Yeah.
came from your writing? Is that something that came from, the art? Is that something that just sort of naturally evolved as the two of you were telling the story together?
Yeah, well, Rafa's a big manga fan, and I've become I was in the 80s, when I was like the very first wave of anime and all of that, like back when it was Akira and Megazone 23 and Vampire Hunter D and Battle Angel Alita, all that stuff. Like, I love that. But now my kids are crazy into manga and anime, where my 14-year-old is like Death Note and Monster and Naruto and My Hero Academia and just nonstop. So it's been a real pleasure to kind of get back into that whole world through them, and to write something with Raphael that has, I think, the spirit of that kind of form, in that it's propulsive, it's very over the top emotional, it's teen driven. It's sort of like about kids that develop powers after this apocalyptic sort of nuclear exchange in the 50s. It's stylized, it's got like big costume sort of cosplay type characters. So it's a lot of over the top fun in that way, and it embraces a lot of the things that Rafa and I both love to do in our work, and mine history for stuff to use in new ways. And this book certainly does that, but it like takes off in a direction that's much more futuristic and Mad Maxian than something like American Vampire. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, that one. I love working on that one.
Yeah, over the top fun is the best kind of fun. So speaking of your kiddos, I know that Dudley Datsun is a little bit of a tonal change for you. A lot of the stuff you write is very horror, very dark, even and very adult.
Yeah.
So what sort of inspired kind of that tonal change with that, and maybe like Barnstormers, for example, and also Duck and Cover, it seems.
I think for me, again, it was, I read so much YA, and I read so much, sort of more exuberant and buoyant fiction than I write, through my kids and through the things that we watch. I'm exposed to it. And so I love that form, and I've always wanted to try something, but in the sort of context of DC, there really wasn't an opportunity to do that. And when you only have a carve out to do like one indie book a year, you kind of want to make it the thing that you like lean into normally. So it was always like horror or action or, you know, whatever. But now having total creative freedom, it really was, you know, about talking to Jamal, and we had become friends over the last 10 years. He was at a signing with me in my very first year at DC at Jim Hanley's Universe with Stefan Roux. And I remember he was on Supergirl, and he was very welcoming to DC to me. And we sort of started a friendship, and, you know, we've been friendly ever since. And it was a couple of years ago, we started talking and saying, you know, we both have kids the same age. Our older kids are both, my son is 14, his daughter's 15. We bonded over kind of I think the trials of being a parent of teenagers. And we wanted to write something that spoke to them. And I had this idea about a kid that stumbles on a perpetual motion machine that was created by Daedalus back in ancient times, and that because it's this kind of impossible thing and breaks the rules of physics, opens doors to other realities. And so it's this very coveted and secret treasure. And so Jamal really responded to that and added all these ideas to it. And we were like, why don't we just try it? And we've had a real blast working on it together. And it's one of those things that we've involved our kids in a little bit. So my 14-year-old, I run stuff by him, and his daughter, Katie, he runs stuff by her. And so they're almost part of the process as well. So it's just a different, again, and like just a different avenue, different set of muscles, really exciting to just kind of, you know, try new things as a writer and embrace things you like, but, you know, we're a little bit scared to try before because you're under such pressure to deliver, I think, for a company like DC or Marvel, and you only have such limited bandwidth to be able to do your own stuff that it's almost hard to take, at least for me, it was to take a greater risk when it was more like, well, if I have 3 things I want to do, creator own wise, I'm going to do the one that's like the most, you know, the most urgent, and I know I love doing, and I don't want to, you know, that was when I was at DC, that was like Witches or American Vampire. Now that I have more room, it's like, well, let me push myself and try different things. So that's kind of where this kind of this grew out of.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love talking about like trying new things and new challenging things, and especially like getting your family involved, like being inspired by your kids and then getting them involved. That's really beautiful. So
Thanks.
yeah, to change tracks just a little bit and talk about also the horror stuff that you do, because the horror is really, really good. You're clearly a master of it. You're obviously a fan of horror. And I wanted to ask about Night of the Ghoul, because of the 3 first issues that I read, that one I was like, oh, I read it a little late in the evening. It's a little dark outside. Maybe I should have read this in the sunlight. But it's built around the premise of this very familiar idea of the haunted real, right? Which is something that's, you know, prevalent in real horror movie legends and a fictional horror movie trope. What inspired you to really put your own kind of twist on that common horror genre?
Well, it was talking to Francesco, you know, who was one of the first 2 artists, him and Jock, to take a chance on me when I was like, you know, nobody, and they were already pretty big stars. And I approached them about doing Detective Comics together. So we've been very close friends for a decade, you know, his wife, Lisa, and my wife. And, you know, we like Francesco is somebody I would just call to catch up with. And it's actually the oldest of all the books in its conception. We started talking about it in maybe 2016, 2017, where we were both kind of reeling from the events of the world. And I think we kind of took solace in revisiting a bunch of old classic horror films. And I just saw from his Twitter feed and his Instagram that he was watching a lot of the old Universal monster stuff. And so was I, and we connected, and I was like, you know, it would be cool if we made a monster together that was sort of a classic monster, but spoke to some of the anxieties in the air right now. And he was like, let's do it. You know, what do you want to? And so we were like, well, what if we take one of these, you know, these kind of like B-team monsters, like a banshee or a ghoul that nobody really thinks about. You know, it's like the little brother to the zombie, the ghoul, and instead like elevate it. So it's something that really really connects to a lot of the fears in the zeitgeist. And that's where it came from. And so it was about kind of honoring or making something that, you know, had connections to classic black and white horror films, but would have a almost this double helix structure where the narrative in the present would really lean into like the kind of terror that you see in movies and books today. Like, you know, real visceral, you know, body horror. There's a lot of bad stuff coming in that book. So it's very much like we want it to be in the present tense, like the scariest thing you've read and the most gruesome. And then in the past, almost a great classic horror film on its own terms. So it's a really interesting challenge to do both and then interweave them, you know, so that they kind of comment on each other in a different way too.
Yeah. And that's great to know as well as somebody who's going to continue to read it. And I love that that visceral body horror is something that you mentioned in this particular book with Francesco, because that is just so perfect for his art style. It's going to be absolutely amazing.
Thanks.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I'm just starting my own Halloween, my own annual Universal Monster movie rewatch.
Oh,
So
great.
that is perfect. And it really does hit on those notes. So for big DC fans who are familiar with your work on Batman and Justice League, but aren't necessarily familiar with some of your other titles that are non-superhero, why should they pick up these books or why should they check out this ComiXology feature?
Yeah. Again, like great question. I mean, I think this is sort of, if you liked anything that I did at DC, this is like that and then more, but also different things that I haven't tried before, but have the same sort of storytelling priorities. You know, I'm someone that likes big heart, big fists, big, you know, big over the top kind of epic storylines. And especially with the creators that you have seen me do stuff with at DC, like Greg Capullo on We Have Demons. Like, I think we're kind of going for what we love to do, but more than you've ever seen of it. So We Have Demons is like Batman or Metal, but done on our own terms, like times 10, two. And other creators from DC, like Francis Manapul, who I did some Justice League stuff with, and Francesco Francavilla, who I worked with on Detective Comics, and Jock also. The goal is, again, to kind of embrace the same storytelling priorities that we had at DC, where it's very character forward, very inviting, very easy to get into, you know, emotionally driven, psychologically driven, but just try things you haven't seen from us before that are darker, that are kind of more speculative, all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of like a treehouse where I get to go with my friends who are people that I think a lot of you guys, if you've read any of our DC stuff, are fans of as well. And we get to make stuff that we both love together, that we built from the ground up. Every single book is something I went to the other creator, the co-creator, and said, what do you think of this idea? Do you want to build it out? And by that, I mean, like, they would take the idea with me and, you know, I'd say, this is kind of the framework of what I'm thinking. What do you think? They would add stuff, characters, designs, all kinds of stuff. So each book really is a labor of love and a passion project with my co-creator, so that if you've liked anything that we've done, I think you'll like this more, because it's just truer to who we are and what we like to do. And all the, I hope that what drew you into the stuff we loved doing at DC was that, like, our passion and our love for those characters. We always tried to put that on the page, and here I think we're doing that, but even more with our own stuff. So my hope is you enjoy it. We really are having a great time, and yeah, I mean, it's just, it feels like a real highlight. So yeah, come in. The water's great. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, if fans are anything like me, you will absolutely enjoy it. As of right now, you can go to ComiXology right this minute. You can read the first issue of Clear, We Have Demons, and Night of the Ghoul. They're all really fantastic. Maybe again, Night of the Ghoul, you might want to turn on a couple of lights if you're like me and you get easily spooked. But thank you so much for answering our questions and telling us about these projects. We're really excited to be able to just share this with people. And we're really excited for you to be able to create these things without having to ask permission or anything like that. And thank you to ComiXology for giving you a platform to do that.
Yeah, they've been a great partner, you know, and I think one of the reasons we really wanted to team up with them is when I started to do my research and see that, you know, for a subscription of what costs like one comic a month, you get access to 40 or 50,000 classic comics and comics by some of my former students and up and comers and emergent diverse voices. It was exciting. It was like, you know what? That seems like a methodology that fits this moment where you subscribe, you can browse stuff you love, and then you go to your store and you buy the stuff that you want for your shelf. So we believe in it, you know, and we really they've been great to us, and they've offered us a lot of creative latitude. So I
Yeah.
feel really good about it and what they're trying to do.
Great. And we'll include a link down below where you guys can go check out everything on ComiXology. We highly recommend giving this stuff a read. Again, Scott, thank you so much for being here. We're very honored. Just in time for Halloween. It is an
Yeah.
honor to have you. It is the Scott Snyder season.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.